Hello, my name is Amy Christina, 30 years old, once found solace in her bustling career until her mother fell ill and passed away, followed soon by her father due to heart complications. Being an only child, Amy faced her grief alone, submerged in work until Bryan, her then colleague, reached out. His companionship blossomed into love, and eventually they married, with his family welcoming her warmly. On a particularly harsh winter day, a heated argument erupted between Amy and Bryan over a failed cooking attempt. "You're awful at this, Bryan. Why don't you go freeze outside with your ruined dish?" she exclaimed in frustration, slamming the window shut and locking it. Outside, Bryan, affected more by the cold than his botched culinary efforts, only smirked at Amy's distress and pulled the curtains close, leaving her shivering by the locked window. As the bitter cold penetrated her skin, Amy, pregnant and increasingly feeble from the dropping temperature, pounded on the glass, her pleas ignored. Just as her strength waned, a passerby noticed her plight and offered assistance. The next day, Amy returned only to find Bryan outside, exposed to the merciless winter, his condition dire. Vincent, the helpful stranger, confronted Bryan. "Isn't this what you deserved? If you can't handle the heat of the kitchen, maybe the cold outside will teach you," Vincent remarked sternly. Amy, despite the recent ordeal, could not help but feel compassion for Bryan. As he shivered helplessly, she decided to call for medical help. "Bryan, do you need anything before help arrives?" Amy asked, approaching him with a blanket. Amidst the chaos, memories of their relationship, from comforting support during her darkest days to the joyous celebration with his family at their wedding, flooded back. "You've truly brought home a wonderful woman," his mother had said, affirming their bond. Even though their marriage had its trials, including this latest ordeal, Amy's resolve to mend things was unshaken. She remembered how Bryan supported her when she had no one else, how they planned future outings like visiting the new cafe by the train station that Bryan had excitedly mentioned. Reconciliation seemed possible as Amy wrapped the blanket around Bryan, the cold receding with the warmth of remembered love and the hope of forgiveness. Bryan raised a concern about his younger brother. "But what about my younger brother? He can be quite a handful, can't he?" "Oh, he's doing just fine," I reassured him. Scott, my brother-in-law, often kept to himself, working from home and spending a lot of time in his room. However, once I took an interest in his projects and asked him about his work, he was more than willing to share details with me. This helped me connect better with Bryan's family. A few years into our marriage, I learned that I was pregnant with Bryan's child. The morning sickness was overwhelming, and I made the difficult decision to leave my job. Bryan supported my decision, saying, "I think that's a good call. Don't overdo it." Quitting wasn't a decision I made lightly. It was thoroughly discussed with Bryan and his family. Thankfully, Bryan and Scott earned enough to support our growing family comfortably. Additionally, my savings, along with my father-in-law still working and my mother-in-law having a part-time job, meant that my quitting wouldn't financially burden anyone. Despite this, someone recently commented, "Wow, pregnant women have it easy. No work, no complaints." This couldn't be further from the truth. Ironically, Bryan had started to complain about me not working, even though he was the one who initially suggested I quit. He accused, "You're just freeloading without a job, acting all high and mighty." "Who's acting high and mighty? I'm the one who always cleans up after you," I retorted. Being naturally competitive, I was determined to prove Bryan wrong. "If you had a problem, you should have spoken up during our discussions. You were the one who brought it up, right?" I reminded him to focus on his responsibilities instead of complaining. Our parents-in-law were on my side and supported my decision, but Bryan felt isolated. He didn't get along well with Scott, further strained their relationship. Scott felt undervalued by Bryan because he worked from home and often confided in me that Bryan neither listened to him nor appreciated his contributions. This disconnect was why Scott rarely engaged in family discussions. Bryan resented this and would vent more when we were alone. "Just because my family likes you doesn't mean you should act all high and mighty," he would say. "I'm not acting that way. Everyone is just being reasonable," I defended myself. Even in our private moments, I stood my ground, a stark contrast to the times when I never lost an argument with Bryan before. Navigating these complex family dynamics required patience and understanding. Despite the challenges, it was essential to maintain open communication and empathy, striving for harmony within the family. As the morning sickness took hold, I found myself too drained to engage in arguments. Bryan had a fixed notion that not working equated to laziness. "Pregnancy isn't an illness. If you're not working, Bryan thinks you're just lazy," was his harsh judgment. Despite this, I knew the truth. Nurturing a new life was an immense effort. Scott recognized this too, reassuring me, "Pregnancy isn't an illness, but what Amy is doing, growing a life inside her, is hard work." Vincent, my other brother-in-law, also saw the effort I was putting in and started to intervene whenever Bryan voiced his criticisms. Each time Bryan complained, Vincent would report it to their parents, resulting in Bryan being admonished for his lack of empathy. With Scott's and Vincent's support, I managed to maintain some humor about our unusual situation, jokingly musing, "At this rate, it's hard to tell who the real father is," as I rubbed my belly. My in-laws were vigilant and supportive, hoping along with me that Bryan would come to see the strain his attitudes were putting on our relationship. However, just as we were adjusting to this dynamic, Bryan began coming home late regularly. He claimed it was due to overtime, but his excuses seemed suspect, especially when he started missing entire nights at home, even on his days off, claiming he was called in to work. Suspicion crept in, not just for me, but for his parents too. We started to wonder if Bryan was being unfaithful. Together, we attempted to gather evidence, but catching him in the act proved difficult. He always appeared to be at the office, and there was no direct evidence of him being with someone else. "We can't know what's going on inside the company," his parents concluded, somewhat defeated. I even reached out to one of his colleagues to see if she noticed anything unusual, but she reassured me that all seemed normal at work and advised, "Hey Amy, take it easy." As my morning sickness worsened, rendering me unable to manage any household chores, my father-in-law stepped in to cook, and my mother-in-law took over other household duties, with Scott helping wherever he could. This family support kept our home running smoothly despite my inability to contribute as I had before. Yet, one night, Bryan, perhaps feeling guilty or frustrated by seeing his parents compensate for my incapacitation, woke me abruptly. "You should be ashamed of yourself lying around all day not doing any housework even though you're a homemaker. Why are you even here?" he accused. I was deeply hurt, but Scott was quick to defend me, firing back at Bryan. "That's rich coming from someone who's not pulling his weight as a husband." This tension highlighted the stark contrasts in our household. While my in-laws and I adapted to the realities of pregnancy, Bryan struggled to find his role, often lashing out instead of lending support. As each day passed, it became more evident that open communication and empathy were crucial if we were to navigate these challenging times together. Even though I'm the eldest, Vincent always had something to say about my supposed shortcomings. "Well, you're not exactly the role model type of brother. You've always been a bit of a know-it-all," he retorted sharply. The tension between us escalated quickly, nearly turning physical before our parents intervened, pulling us apart. After the confrontation, our parents were disappointed with Bryan. "That's enough. Do whatever you want, but where are you going without talking to me?" they scolded as Bryan stormed off without a word. In his absence, they apologized to me on his behalf, trying to smooth over the rough edges of the situation. However, Bryan's behavior had been deteriorating over time, and it was clear that some resolution was needed soon. On a particular Saturday, when my in-laws had previously planned to attend a local event, they expressed their concern about leaving me alone due to Bryan's recent unpredictable moods. "I'm concerned about leaving you," my mother-in-law voiced her worries. "I'll be fine," I assured them. "My morning sickness has eased up a lot." Reluctantly, they left, filled with concern, while at the same time Vincent had to leave for overnight commitments. "I'm sorry for leaving at this time," he said, to which I replied, "It's okay, take care." Shortly after everyone departed, I found myself alone with Bryan, who was still asleep at home. Despite not feeling completely well, I decided to get up and be proactive around the house. I didn't want to give Bryan any reason to criticize me for being idle. Thankfully, my father-in-law had prepared plenty of dishes ahead of time and stored them in the fridge. I started cleaning and doing laundry, taking it easy but making sure to keep busy. Around noon, Bryan finally woke up, his appearance unkempt and his demeanor grumpy. "Hey, breakfast," he demanded, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. I rolled my eyes at his command and fetched some leftovers from the fridge. "What's that?" he asked, peering at the plate. "Leftovers. Your dad made them. You can't even cook as a homemaker?" Bryan remarked snidely. His comment struck a nerve. "Why do you say things like this? Don't you realize I'm pregnant with your child?" "There's no excuse for your behavior," I responded, frustrated by his lack of empathy and support. "Sorry, but right now my main job is taking care of our baby. Household chores can wait," I declared firmly, prioritizing my health and our unborn child over the immediate demands of housework. "How dare you talk to your husband like that?" Bryan shouted back at me, his voice rising in anger. At that moment, the challenges of our relationship were laid bare, compounded by the stress of pregnancy and the lack of support from Bryan. It was clear that we needed a better understanding and a shift in our dynamics if we were to navigate this critical phase of our lives together. As the tension between Bryan and me escalated, Scott unexpectedly burst through the door, momentarily breaking the strain of the moment. I could hear Bryan and him arguing loudly just outside the room. "You stay out of this," Bryan snapped at Scott before storming off to his room, muttering under his breath. Shortly after, he left the house in a huff. Scott let out a heavy sigh as he entered the room. "You okay?" he asked, his concern evident in his voice. "Yeah, what brings you here?" I replied, trying to mask my unease. "I just came to pick up something I forgot," Scott explained, his eyes reflecting the worry he felt for me. I chuckled, noting how much he resembled his mother in that moment. "It's all right, go ahead, don't worry about me," I assured him, trying to ease his concern. "Okay then, I'll head out," Scott said, pausing hesitantly before leaving. His departure left me alone with my thoughts, pondering the drastic changes in Bryan and how distant he had become from the man I first met. Divorce seemed like a looming reality, yet I still hoped to maintain a relationship with my in-laws. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I decided to lie down, and before I knew it, I had fallen into a deep sleep. "Amy, time to wake up." Bryan's voice gently stirred me from sleep. I mumbled as I sat up, bracing myself for another round of reprimands. However, instead of the cold demeanor I expected, Bryan offered a sincere smile. "I wanted to let you sleep, but it's already evening," he said softly, surprising me with his gentle tone. "I've prepared dinner, so when you're ready, come join me," he added, leaving the room. As I noticed a blanket draped over me, I wondered if it was Bryan who had covered me with it, showing care in his gesture. I made my way to the kitchen and found the dishes my father-in-law had made, already warmed up and ready to eat. Bryan looked at me with a genuine expression of remorse. "I'm sorry, Amy," he began, his voice sincere. "When I found out we were having a baby, I was thrilled, but then I got overwhelmed and took it out on you. This cake is my way of apologizing." He presented a cake to me, and though his gesture couldn't erase all the past hurts, His genuine apology warmed my heart. For now, I decided to forgive him and enjoy our meal together. "Look, it's snowing!" Bryan exclaimed with a childlike excitement, breaking the calm of our dinner. "Oh, you're right. Let's go see," I replied, following him to the window. The sight of snow falling against the night sky was mesmerizing. Coming from a place where it rarely snowed, this was a special moment for me. Without hesitation, I moved closer to the window. "Let's open it," Bryan suggested, and together we watched the peaceful snowflakes drift down, a quiet yet hopeful symbol of a new beginning for us. "But it'll be cold," I protested as Bryan reached for a jacket. "Just put on a jacket," he insisted, draping it over my shoulders and opening the window to the chilly wind. I braced myself against the cold, but suddenly Bryan hugged me. Before I knew it, he had nudged me outside, and as I turned around, I saw him grinning mischievously. "You're a homemaker who doesn't do the housework. That makes you a bad wife. Think about that tonight," he teased. "Excuse me? What are you saying? You can't even cook," I retorted, my voice sharp with frustration. With that, Bryan shut and locked the window. I rushed to the glass, pleading with him to open it as I pounded on the glass, but he just grinned and drew the curtains closed. The cold began to bite, and my body, warm just moments before from the heater, rapidly lost its heat. Panic set in as I thought about the baby inside me and how the cold could affect us both. Just as I felt like I might pass out from the cold and shock, a car pulled up beside me. "Why were you out here at this time of night?" It was Scott, who had come home earlier than planned because he was worried about Bryan. The car's heater brought relief as warmth seeped back into my bones. "We should go to the hospital just to be safe," Scott suggested, his tone laced with concern as he drove me there. Thanks to his quick thinking, both my baby and I were checked and found to be okay. While I was being examined, Scott arranged for us to stay at a hotel for the night and then left to take care of some other matters. Feeling the stress of the evening start to ebb away, I rubbed my belly, whispering to my baby, "I'm so relieved you're going to be strong, right?" Exhaustion overcame me quickly, and I fell asleep as soon as I lay down on the hotel bed. The next morning, as we left the hospital, Scott checked on me. "Oh, Amy, are you feeling better now?" "Yes, I'm completely fine now. Thank you so much," I replied, overwhelmed with gratitude. "No problem. Shall we head home?" Scott suggested. As we arrived home, I was stunned to see Bryan outside, freezing and naked in the yard. Scott approached him with a cold gaze and tone. "This is what you said, right? If you can't cook properly, then freeze outside." Bryan, shivering uncontrollably, couldn't muster a proper response. The stark contrast between Scott's caring demeanor and Bryan's harsh prank highlighted the tension and need for serious changes in our relationship dynamics. The incident was a jarring reminder of the support I needed and who was truly there for me when it mattered most. Scott's voice cut through the tension, soft yet urgent. "I'll call an ambulance out of kindness. Amy, do you want to say anything to him before it arrives?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for an answer. I nodded and stepped closer to Bryan, who lay confused and remorseful. "It's because of you that our baby was almost in danger. I will never forgive you. Just wait," I told him firmly, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. Later, after Bryan had been taken to the hospital, I turned to Scott, seeking clarity on the events that had unfolded after he had dropped me off at the hotel. He recounted the night's ordeal. Returning home alone, he found Bryan asleep in the living room. Not alone, but rather in the company of another woman who appeared to be his mistress. Bryan, thinking he wouldn't be caught, had brought her home with the confidence of someone who believed his deceit would remain hidden. Enraged, Scott didn't hesitate. He threw Bryan out of the house, forcing him to face the cold reality of his actions in his birthday suit. Scott then dealt with the woman, interrogating her, gathering evidence, and responsibly sending her back to her own family, which was unaware of her actions. As dawn approached, after ensuring everything was taken care of, Scott took a short nap in his car before coming back to pick me up. That morning, as he shared these details, his voice was calm but tired. "I've spoken to my parents. They're coming back today," he informed me, a gentle smile touching his weary features. He stayed by my side, a comforting presence in the storm. "It's going to be okay now, Scott. Thank you so much," I said, my heart filled with gratitude for his steadfast support. Scott simply nodded, his reply humble. "I just did what needed to be done. I want you to feel safe at home." When Bryan returned, he was full of apologies and excuses, quickly facing the consequences of his actions. He was forced to pay child support and was removed from our home. "I'm so sorry, Amy. It was just a mistake. I truly love only you," he pleaded. But I found myself tuning out his words, tired of the cycles of apologies and mistakes. As I reflected silently, Bryan suddenly became aggressive, his frustration boiling over as he raised his hand toward me. That was the last straw. "Enough is enough," Scott intervened swiftly, his actions quick as he subdued Bryan with a skilled twist of his arm, aided by my father-in-law. "I just lost my mind for a moment, Amy," Bryan claimed remorsefully as he was escorted out by Scott and my father-in-law, while my mother-in-law comforted me. Watching Bryan being led away, I felt a mix of relief and sadness, realizing how far he had fallen. As Scott and I discussed the incident, I remarked on his strength. "Oh yeah, he used to do combat sports. Wouldn't recommend that move on just anyone," Scott replied with a light smile which sparked a flutter in my heart. My mother-in-law, noticing our exchange, chuckled. "With such good looks and strength, it's surprising he doesn't have a girlfriend," she teased. Scott bashfully looked away, a response I found incredibly endearing. From then on, I decided to remain in the safety and care of my in-laws' home, a place where I felt loved and supported as we all eagerly awaited the birth of my baby. "If you'd allow, I'd love to hold your baby," my mother-in-law said warmly. "Of course, anytime," I replied, smiling, touched by her kindness. In the safety of this family, I found solace and strength, ready to face the future, no matter what it might bring. Amy recounted her tumultuous journey, sharing how discovering the clandestine meetings between her now ex-husband Bryan and a colleague had led to significant changes in her life. Once I reported it to the colleague's husband, he conducted a thorough investigation. With that evidence, my divorce process proceeded smoothly. Both of them were fired for misconduct during work hours and for misrepresenting personal outings as business expenses, she explained. "Thank you for all the help," Amy said to Scott, her voice filled with gratitude. "It's only natural to want to help someone you love," Scott replied, his cheeks flushing a deep red at his admission. "Wait, what?" Amy was taken aback and both blushed at the revelation. It turned out that Scott had harbored feelings for Amy for quite some time. "I always thought I should hide these feelings," Scott confessed. Amy was surprised. She had never imagined that Scott felt that way about her. "Honestly, I'm not ready to be in a relationship like that right now," Amy admitted, still reeling from the upheavals in her life. "I understand, but if you can wait a bit, I want to explore these feelings," Scott said, hopeful yet respectful of her space. Amy smiled, touched by his sincerity, and Scott's smile mirrored her warmth. "I'm going to do everything I can to make you see how much I care," Scott declared. "Okay, I'll be ready for that," Amy replied, open to the possibility of a future together. During dinner, which was delicious, Scott's parents overheard their conversation and couldn't help but tease. "Looks like Scott has a girlfriend now," his mother joked, to which Scott responded with a playful blush, eliciting laughter from his father. Amy's life continued to evolve beautifully. "I gave birth to our lovely daughter right on time," Amy proudly shared. "She's so cute. Congratulations. She looks just like you, Amy," Scott's parents complimented. "I don't want to let her go," Scott said, embracing his role as a father enthusiastically. Years later, Amy fondly remembered, I happily married Scott, and our daughter calls him Daddy. Scott adores her. They speculated about their future, imagining their next child. I think our next child will be a boy, Scott guessed. Yeah, that would be cool if he's like me, but having a boy who looks like you would be awesome too, Scott added, looking forward to their growing family. I'm pregnant with our second child now, Amy announced, her face alight with happiness. Our daughter is thrilled about becoming a big sister. We're all thinking of names together. It seems like our daughter's suggestion might win, Amy laughed, sharing the light-hearted family moments. I'm going to make sure Amy, our daughter, and the new baby are happy, Scott promised. Don't forget about yourself in that promise, Amy said with a smile, emphasizing the importance of self-care even in their shared happiness. We're planning to live happily ever after, all 7 of us together, having fun and getting along. That's our plan, Amy included, her voice brimming with hope and contentment. We can't wait to go out together as a family once the new baby arrives, she added, envisioning a future filled with love and togetherness.